Hey everybody, welcome to this edition of Tech Talk. Sorry it's been a while since I've uploaded something, but I'm trying to do some different things with some videos, and it's been kind of a crazy month and trying to work with some people's schedules, and it just hasn't worked out to get a video up, but I do have a lot of things in the works. It's just actually having the time and working with schedules and actually getting them done. Now today's something just kind of simple and straightforward. It's about managing transition. And there are really two ways to approach transition or to attack transition. And for house shots or for easier shots, what you generally consider to be a house shot is there's more oil in the middle, there's less oil on the outside. So if you miss to the outside, the dry out there is going to help the ball hook back to the pocket. And if you miss inside, the oil is going to help the ball push to the pocket. It doesn't necessarily funnel the ball in there, but it kind of gives you, it's more recreational. It gives you a little bit more playability. It's not so punishing. Then you have sport patterns, which are generally flatter, which actually make more sense. If you miss to the outside, the ball doesn't recover. If you miss inside, the ball overhooks. The end result on managing transition and creating transition is the same, as you want something as playable as possible. The end result is you want something as playable as possible, as long as possible. Now for house shots, the majority of the time they start out easy and they get more difficult. And sport shots, they start out more difficult and get easier if you do it right, but that's a topic for another video. But for right now, I'm going to talk about managing transition. And this is going to be more aimed at high school bowlers because as I see styles develop, I think that we're kind of in there's different eras, different styles, different games that people that people tend to have depending on which era of bowling they're from, and I kind of think this is the cranker or the two-hander era, where most of the boys are going to have very high rev rates. The girls' rev rates are getting higher, but they still haven't changed that much from years past. But men's rev rates have gotten significantly higher, in my opinion, or for what I'm seeing, and that can make, especially in high school, the transition that the lanes go through very, very different. Now, if you bowl in adult leagues, you may not notice something so much because you're going to be bowling with a bunch of different styles and a bunch of different ages. So you're going to have the everything from the stroker to the tweener to the cranker to everything in between, the power stroker, power tweener, even some two-handed bowlers once some of the younger bowlers are getting up there. But on a nightly basis, the way that you manage transition is going to change really based on who you're bowling. But for the high school game, the vast majority of the boy bowlers have higher rev rates. And so in watching the last couple of years, it's very predictable for me as to what I'm going to see in transition as the kids get into the second and third games. Now the most important, to me, after having watched and thought about this, the most important factor in transition in today's game is rev rate. Because with these newer balls that are designed to flare, that are designed to pick up oil off the lanes, the higher of a rev rate you have, the more oil gets picked up off the lane faster. The lower of a rev rate you have, you're still going to pick some oil up, but you are going to see, as a lower rev bowler, you're going to see carry down before you see track burn, if you ever see track burn. Higher rev rate bowlers are going to see track burn before they see carry down and may never see carry down. Now, a short little story of my own here. There used to be a center here in town that had lane shield. For those of you that don't know, lane shield was a very thin laminate that was put over wood lanes once they'd reached the end of their resurfacing cut, or their resurfacing cuts. Basically, wood lanes used to be just like a bowling ball. You know, you get dense depressions, you get nicks, cuts, whatever else in them, and so every once in a while you would bring a resurfacer in and you would smooth the lanes back out, just like resurfacing a bowling ball. You'd smooth it out, get all those cuts, depressions, whatever else out of there, and you'd just refinish the surface. But wood lanes got to a certain point where you got to the end of your resurfacing cuts where it was you can't resurface it anymore, you have to replace it. And as we got into the synthetic era, you wouldn't just replace a wood lane with another wood lane, which was still expensive but wasn't near as expensive as going to a synthetic installation. And so lane shield was supposed to be a product that would bridge that gap, or would kind of extend the life of the wood lanes a little bit while you're either getting the money or preparing to put in synthetics. The original idea behind lane shield was supposed to last 7 years. Well, it only lasted about 2 or 3 years. And there was a house, like I said, we had in this center here in town was one of the test houses for it. Well, the lane shield was on there for several years after it burned up, and so it required some very specific and interesting strategies to get through the night without going 250, 200, 150 to kind of even that out. And that's when I really started to get a very big focus, or when I really started noticing or paying attention to the lane transition. Like I said, you're going to have, if you're bowling adult leagues, you're going to have all different styles from all different eras of bowling. And so the lanes are going to transition different really from night to night depending on who you're bowling. But in high school bowling, the vast majority of the boys have higher rev rates, the vast majority of the girls have lower rev rates. And so here are a few keys for you high school bowlers out there to help manage your transition, or to help keep the shot as playable as possible for as long as possible, and hopefully just improve your scores a little bit. Most of the time, most of the house shots you're going to see are kind of medium. They're medium volume, they're about 40-ish feet, so you're not going to see anything super dry or super heavy. And for the boys out there, one of the most important things is do not use a lot of surface. You might be able to use an aggressive ball, but don't use something with a bunch of surface on it, because even something shiny is going to pick the oil up at a very quick rate, because you're going to come back, and if you have a 400 plus rev rate, you're going to have several rings of oil around that ball. And with the way that these balls flare now, they don't roll over the same spot like urethane used to. Urethane just roll over the same spot, and so you get carried down with urethane, because there was only about they used to say that if you had a dime, track the width of a dime, that you were pretty consistent. That's not the case anymore. I mean, every single time the ball rotates, you're getting one oil track, you're getting a different oil track, getting a different oil track, and so that's picking up oil off the lanes. Even with shiny balls, if you've got that ball rotating, 8, 9, 10 times, you got 8, 9, 10 oil rings around your ball, and so you're picking oil up off the lane very fast. And if you are a bowler with a higher rev rate, generally you are going to want a little bit of carry down, because I think that it's more beneficial to kind of tame out that backend reaction, because sometimes, especially when the lanes are fresh, the ball's going to hit the end of that oil pattern, it's going to turn sideways. Well, if you get a little bit of carry down to kind of mellow out that back end move, it's going to allow you to straighten up your angles a little bit, and it's going to give you a little bit more playability. It's going to give you even a little bit more room at the pocket. So I think my keys for male bowlers is really just do not use super aggressive surfaces. And if you do happen to have a lower rev rate, there's not a whole lot of boys in high school bowling that have lower rev rates, but if you do happen to have a lower rev rate, do not worry about what's happening in practice too much. You will get some friction. You will get some friction eventually. You don't want to take something out that's super sanded and try to act like it's a sport pattern and try to burn yourself into shots so that you can get on it right away. Most of the time, if you just straighten up a little bit, especially on house shots, there's going to be friction somewhere. And the guys with higher rev rates, they are going to create you somewhat of a track. So it's nothing that, there's 10 minutes of practice, and the lanes actually go through a decent amount of transition just in practice. So you don't want to really force something to happen right now that may screw you for games 2 or 3, or depending on, sometimes you have 3 games, then you have more games of Baker, or sometimes you have Baker, and every high school really does it different. But the key thing is that you want it to stay the way that it is for as long as possible. If you force it to transition sooner, then you might end up with playability sooner, but you might screw yourself for just the back half of the session or what you're doing. Now for female bowlers, you might want to use something with a little bit more surface to kind of develop yourself a track a little bit sooner, because what's going to happen is you probably will have something very playable for practice and maybe halfway through the first game or through the first game, because what's going to happen is having the back ends being very strong is good for lower rev bowlers, because you're going to be able to get that motion out of the ball that you don't normally see a whole lot. You want as much motion as you're going to get, because generally you don't have a whole lot. So you might want to use something with some surface on it to kind of combat the carry down that you're eventually going to get later. And if you use something with surface on it, you're not going to get as much carry down later as if you would if you use something with a shiny surface. The ball is going with the surface is going to pick the oil up off the lane rather than transition it further down the lane. So as the lanes transition, you might want some friction earlier instead of the ball getting to the end of the pattern and not reading the pattern and leaving you with some flat corner pins, or just not quite making it even back up to the head pin sometimes because you just got so many shiny balls going straight down the side that are just taking that oil and they're just pushing it down and pushing it down. You might want something with more surface on it to take the oil off the lanes faster so that you can have that friction that you need. Now, most of what I've talked about is just for the righty bowlers. For the lefty bowlers, you do what you do because you know what you're doing. The transition on the left side of the lane is extremely predictable at all levels for all ages because you know exactly what you're going to do to the lanes, and very rarely do you have anybody else on your side of the lane. So for lefty bowlers, you know, just do what you do. Now, just a little section here for adult bowlers. Depending on who you're bowling with from night to night, you're most likely going to have to pay a lot more attention because you're going to have a lot of different styles playing a lot of different areas of the lane. Maybe you don't want to pay that much attention, but I find it kind of beneficial to just pay the amount of attention that you kind of need to know when you make those. The biggest thing for me for adult leagues is knowing where everybody else is playing. Because if you go to make a move, most of the time you're going to be moving into somebody else's transition. So you might be thinking, okay, well, my ball is starting to hook a little bit more. I'm just going to move a couple boards. But you might be moving into somebody else's friction that is playing just a little bit inside of you. And so it's very common to make a couple board move and actually have the ball hook more. And then you're scratching your head going, well, I moved left and the ball hooked more. Well, yeah, that's because you're moving into somebody else's transition. Or if you move right, you might be moving into somebody else's carry down. So having an idea of where everybody else on the lane is playing helps you to make your adjustments that you know that you need to make better, because most of the time you're going to be moving into somebody else's transition. So paying attention to where everybody else is playing is the most important thing for me about managing your transition bowling in adult leagues. That's going to wrap it up for now. I didn't want to do something too involved or too over the top. And transition sometimes is going to be a case-by-case basis. It's not. I could spend an hour talking about how to combat all the different variations of transition and a transition on wood lanes versus synthetic lanes versus this type of oil versus whatever else. I could spend forever on it. So if you have specific questions about specific situations, leave me something down in the comments below, or just ask me some questions and we can figure out for your specific situation. But these are just some general examples of what you should expect to see the majority of the time, and just a few ways to combat the transition. So thank you for watching. We'll see you on the next one.